We'll call to order the Saline Board of Education study session for Tuesday, March 25th, 2014. I invite you to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This is the portion of the meeting where members of the public may address the board for up to 3 minutes. Is there anybody from the audience who wishes to address the board this evening? Superintendent Grady.
All right, before I get into my comments, I'd like to...
I'm sorry.
I'm also a member of the public, so is that up? Can anybody hear me?
No, it's not.
The button's turned on. There we go. So I'm also a member of the public, so. I'm Todd Carter, 6156 Gyres Middle Lane, Pittsfield Township. I suffer from depression and some of its accompanying problems. It went undiagnosed for my high school days until about 15 years ago. Since that time, I've been in and out of therapy and on and off medications. I know now that there's a chemical component to my depression and that I do best when I take my meds and use cognitive behavioral therapy. It has been very difficult on my wife Nancy, so please pray for her. She is a saint to put up with me. Science alone has never been able to alleviate my symptoms. All the self-medicating that I did through late high school, all of college, and into my adult life only complicated matters. It has only been recently that I've received real relief. I stand here today for 2 reasons. Number 1, to reduce the perceived stigma of depression. Many people around you suffer in silence. It amazed me when I started taking a poll of the people I know who admitted to be on meds for depression or anxiety. If we are brave, show your hands if you've ever been medicated or counseled for depression or anxiety. So there are many people, and I would say there are probably many people who didn't raise their hands. Number 2, and most importantly, the cure that I have embraced and that I believe could have saved thousands of high school students who have committed suicide because they lost all hope, is God. I believe that I made it through high school because my parents had a relationship with God. Consequently, I was only 1 generation away from that relationship. I inherited enough to keep me safe as I struggled through. Many American children are multiple generations away from a solid relationship with God. Their parents, if they have them, have no relationship with God. So in many cases, they have nothing and no one that they can count on when everything and everyone has abandoned them, or worse yet, turned on them. When you are there, perception is reality. We all have a God-shaped hole in us that we try to fill with anything that we can find. Having been denied the opportunity to know God by a culture that makes God unfashionable, unknowable, or ridiculous, our children are left to find their own way through adolescence using only human inventions. In many cases, these inventions are good: academics, athletics, cultural, vocational, things that advance human society. In other cases, not so good: drugs, pornography, violence, gangs, things that tear down human society or return to a more biological existence. I am disappointed that our culture has utterly denied a known, and in some cases, when partnered with science, a complete cure for depression, anxiety, and mental illness. And if that is not enough, it is now in the process of destroying the Catholic and Christian health systems that take care of these problems. Last paragraph. Can Saline make a change and save our children from depression, anxiety, and mental illness? I am not asking Saline to become some kind of a parochial school district. I'm asking that Saline return to giving our citizens' beliefs room to breathe. There was a time when Wednesday evenings were considered a church evening and sports and activities were not actively scheduled on Wednesday nights if they could be avoided. There was a time when talking about God was not considered in poor taste. Religion was not a private matter between you and your God. It was something to celebrate and share. Regardless, it was something that you learned early on, and in my case, even if I was actively not listening, you could count on. And it saved me. Thank you.
Thank you. Superintendent Grade.
Before I start I'd like to invite all of the members of the Department of Public Works, our Transportation Department, and our snow crew to come up and kind of stand over here. We'd like to get a picture, and I know President Holden and Mayor Marl are here to say a few words in thanks.
Right up front. Patty needs to be right up front. Oh, no. Yeah, come on, get together. Oh, you want us closer? Oh. Here we are. So we work on the premise of no touching, okay? Ow. I can't see you. Thanks, man. It was great. You sure you're getting me in it? Who's staring at that? You're excellent there.
You'll be fine until you open your mouth.
Rondo, last name Rondo.
All right, we'll turn it over President Holden.
Go ahead, Mayor.
Well, thank you very much. I would be remiss if I didn't begin tonight by thanking School Board President Holden, Superintendent Graydon, and members of the school board for organizing this recognition ceremony. I think it's appropriate, valuable, and I applaud you for your leadership in doing so. I want to recognize, and I'll recognize all of you, my employees, or our employees, excuse me, from DPW. If you please raise your hands. First of all, thank you for being here very much, gentlemen. Let's give them a round. I have a great affinity for our employees at our Department of Public Works, and they number 12 full-time employees. A little bit of history, my great-granddad, Emmanuel Shirt, when he sold his farm in Lodi Township in the late 1940s and moved into the city of Saline, he worked for the DPW for 20 years before retiring. So I have a lot of respect for what these men and women do on a daily basis. And I thought it was appropriate as I drove in this evening that it was snowing. Appropriate, albeit tragic in a way. But this was a very hard, very difficult winter. And I emphasize the number 12 because that's a pretty small department, and you all are cognizant of what they have to do, and the tasks and responsibilities are quite profound. And that number 12, the fact that that's how many people are dealing with these problems, makes it pretty impressive. And so I want to congratulate you. I want to thank you. I want to thank those of you who work for Saline Area Schools as well. I think what is true of our DPW department is true of the facilities department as well. And this has been said by people far more eloquent than me, which is those of us in elected office in a policy position, what we do and what we contribute is important, but we probably do 10% of the work. You all do 90% of the work. It's not to diminish what I do on an annual but it's indicative of your contributions and how much, and the tangible things that you do for the community and how much we all benefit from that. So let's give them all one more round of applause.
Just to kind of recap the winter, and I'm not sure it's done yet. It was snowing, now the sun's
It's
out.
done.
Oh, yes, Scott and I are not checking more roads.
Right, we had at 5 in the morning.
What? That's too late.
We've had over 90 inches of snow. Our normal snowfall is about 44 inches. So we've had double the amount of snow. Had 13 days below zero. That's the most we've had since 83, 84. We have 36 people in our transportation group. That's from driver to director. And they travel 2,200 miles every day and transport close to 2,400 students. And I can tell you, the parental community appreciates what you do, because they do have an expectation that their child's going to leave safely and return safely. And I know on my street, you know, about a third of it went away because the snowbanks were there. So we know what you went through in terms of navigating those roads, and to do that with no incidents certainly speaks to the professionalism of the group. In terms of our snow crew, we have 10 members covering 50 acres of parking lots, bus loops, and drives, 7 miles of sidewalks, entrances, and walkways. We went through 1,600 50-pound bags of salt and over 460 tons of salt, and that's from like November up until today. So you know, when we walk into a school facility and we're not slipping and sliding, you know, it's a testament to those people who get out there sometimes very early to make sure that when people arrive, they arrive safely. So again, I can echo what the mayor said. We certainly appreciate what you do. I can assure you that the parental community appreciates it, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the recognition.
Could I say real quick, as a bus driver here in Saline, I need to say thank you to my mechanics. We only have 2, and they did a phenomenal job this winter, and they continue to. They keep us on the road, they rescue us when we get stuck. And you guys are awesome.
Thank you.
All right, just a couple of quick comments. A couple of, one is next week on April 1st, we have the Next Generation Classroom Tours. If you haven't been on one yet, that's a great opportunity. You can sign up on the website, visit some of the Next Generation classrooms. I would encourage you, if you have not done that, to do so. This Friday, we have the bus to, or not bus to visit, it's actually called Boardroom to Class, Classroom to Boardroom, an opportunity at from 7:30 to 10 to look at some of the programs we have offering and provide some feedback to our vocational department about the skills necessary to be successful if you're around and can sign up for that. That'd be great. Again, 7:30 to 10 a.m. this Friday at Saline High School. And then also to let you know, we've started to implement the essentially an internal or an external, audit system of our financial and cash handling procedures, and that will be something that we will look to make ongoing, and that will be kicking off very shortly related to our cash handling and our, again, the audit process. I'm looking to get that going here very, very quickly. And then lastly, and Mr. Pickett's here, and I have a note that went around. I think I shared some with the board, but I would like to highlight that our peer-to-peer group campaign, that really is the overall goal is to reduce the stigma of depression, bipolar, and anxiety amongst high schoolers. And an activity and event that when I got a picture that was passed around. I think you've seen the email, but I want to pass that around again and thank Mr. Pickett and that group for the work that they've done, and we may hear more about that tonight. That's all I have.
Okay. Any comments from board members?
I was over at Woodland Meadows today and got some nice
feedback for everybody in terms of the 21st century classrooms and how they're going. I was reading in Mrs. Junga's class, and then the principal kindly took me around to see what else was going on in the building, and I heard from Mrs. Munson as the teacher consultant in the building that their scores, the kids' scores, have made tremendous gains as a result of the technology that they have in the building, which is great. I also, just in keeping with the theme of the evening, because I'm an old elementary person, I love visuals. But there was a great big red heart in the hallway, which is apparently part of a STARS program, which is a support program for special ed students by general ed students. And the meaning of this was a big old wrinkled heart with everybody's names on them. And the idea of the heart was that you need to watch what you say to others because it hurts them. Crumple, crumple, crumple. And while you can say sorry and smooth it out, it will never be as smooth as it was when you started. I thought that was a very nice piece of imagery.
So I think time for your courage. I agree with that. Raphael, you got anything?
Actually, yeah, I have one statement to make. Thursday and Friday, Strive had our student exchange day, and with the help of Ms. Halber and the Strive's advisor, Ms. Fundnick, we had student exchange day, so students from Saline had the opportunity to go to Dexter and experience what Dexter students get to experience, and it was a lot of fun. And we took back and learned a lot from Dexter students. When Dexter students, came to Saline, we got a lot. So just want to say thank you to Ms. Halber and Ms. Fundnick for helping us create that event.
Excellent. Just a couple things. I believe on Friday is the Saline Salutes evening, and that's when Raphael will be recognized as the Young Person of the Year, and I think everybody's received invites to that. And then on Saturday, they'll be rededicating the play structure at Pleasant Ridge. I believe that is at 4 o'clock, and then, so if anybody can make that, I will be out of town for the weekend. And tomorrow we'll be meeting with Raphael's put together a student focus group. So Superintendent Grady and I will be spending some time at the high school with some students talking on a number of different topics. And thanks for putting that together. And then lastly, Diane and I attended the Way meeting last week. They've kind of made some changes to that structure. They're kind of going to have to bring it under the Washtenaw Association of School Boards. So a lot of those functions will roll up through there. For those of us who were on the board 2 years ago, that was a pilot program that was run for 2 years. After that 2-year experience, they felt that a lot of those things could be in the WASB organization. Also, they elected their officers for the next year. I was nominated and elected to be the Secretary-Treasurer of WASB for the next year. So that means I get to take notes. And that. So that's all I've got. So with that, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the agenda as printed. So moved. Chief, with a second from Trustee Carter. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And tonight's study session is on social and emotional wellness. And last year at our February board session, we had a session on mental health, mental illness. As we've developed the strategic framework, certainly in Goal 4, we speak to that. And I think tonight is a continuation of that. And I think it dovetails well with some of the other initiatives that are going on within the community. I think it's something that we need to pay attention to. I think Trustee Carter's comments tonight were spot on in many ways in terms of the stigma of mental illness that still is prevalent within our society. And hopefully through this effort tonight and ongoing effort, that we'll begin to break down that barrier and be able to reach out to families so that parents who have issues with their children know where to go to get the resources. And I'd like to thank Trustee Delhay for really doing the legwork on putting together the agenda for this evening. We appreciate that, and with that, I'll turn it over to Superintendent Grady.
And I'm going to kick it right over
Trustee
to
Delhay.
Trustee Delhay and Assistant Superintendent Lodge.
I just want to say thank you to Mr. Lodge and Mr. Graydon and Mr. Shuby, Mr. Pickett, and Kimberly Ray, who are here to speak to us tonight. And Mr. Lodge is going to take the lead on this, so we're going to let him go with that. But thank you very much for all your work that you put into this.
Okay, great. So the topic tonight is social and emotional wellness. We have a number of people at the table. Mark Shuby, a student assistance coordinator for our district. Kimberly Ray is going to talk a little bit about her son's tragic story. We have Jason Pickett, who's a social worker at the high school and alternative high school. And then we have a number of people in the audience: Michelle Monahan, Brian Bruckman, counselors at the high school, Joel Benedict, who's a social worker at Heritage. Am I missing anybody of our health professionals? So as we do our round table or square table discussion, we do want, feel free to chime in as we talk about, where we're at as a district with social and emotional wellness. We are going to
Excuse me, Steve, I'm sorry, I just wanted to say there's a representation from Saline Alive here as well.
Okay.
Any ladies in the audience.
Okay, great. So Celia, feel free to chime in as we go. We're going to start though with Kimberly Ray, and she's going to talk about her story and educate us on her son.
Okay. My son was Johnny Strawbridge. He was, I believe, the last death from a heroin overdose on December 2nd, 2013. So for 2013, I know there were 3 actual deaths related to heroin overdose. Johnny, I do think, struggled with some depression. I appreciate what you had to say there. And although I took him to counselors, here and there, they all said there's nothing wrong with him. He's fine. He's a normal kid, so I kind of blew that off. But and he did cause some, issues in the last years of his high school, skipping school and not doing the right things, which I struggled with. But ultimately, it started with prescription drug use after he got out of high school, in college with Vicodins and OxyContin. It did not come from my cabinet. It doesn't have to come from your parents' cabinet. It can come from, it's street drugs. It's what's sold on the street. And he just, after he got involved in it, realized he was addicted to it. He was being promoted at work. He was going to school full time. He was doing all the things I thought that were all the right things. So I wasn't looking at him in a way that I thought that I should worry at that point in time. In fact, I was feeling like he was kind of growing out of this, phase he went through in high school, which a lot of us had done, back in high school, in those high school years. Ultimately, what happened was he realized the addiction and the withdrawals that you go through with it. He was a very responsible worker and trying really hard in school to keep it all up at the same time, and was offered heroin as an alternative to the expensive OxyContin, and it's all too prevalent right now. It was something I had no idea of, and something he had no idea of as far as the effects that it was going to have on his brain, and the effects that it was going to have as far as withdrawals, and that he couldn't get off it as easy as I think he thought he'd be able to. So ultimately, he did come to me a couple months after he actually tried it, and he asked for help from then on. Now, we did have our ups and downs. It was a whole, pretty much a year and a half of struggle with him, and trying to keep it away from him and trying to keep him away from it. And it does go both ways, because these dealers do solicit these kids, believe it or not, and they do it with mass texts and in all kinds of different ways. And ultimately, he lost his battle on December 2nd. But I do think that, in contrast to my daughter didn't seem like she had that depression at that age. She was real involved in really great things in school, and he was too. But I think as a parent, when your child's suffering with something like that. And I think it's really great that we're having this conversation tonight and trying to figure out ways that the school can do more, because you guys see them every day as well. And for us to be able to, as a parent, to reach out to the school system and say, hey, I just don't know what to do at this point, and to actually have some really good concrete help with us. The peer groups and that type of thing, I think, is awesome. And the counseling is awesome. And Mark, I know you've been awesome. All of that's really great. But I do feel like we definitely need to do more with education and awareness. And I've started a page, I've started a Facebook group page. It's called the Heroin Epidemic in Washtenaw County. I'm trying to put as much education up there as possible. And then I'm also trying to start a nonprofit called the Heroin War. Some people hate the war because of the war on drugs back in the 80s, but I do believe this is a bit of a war. And so I thought that was a very good name for this. And so I'm in the process of doing this now, and I invite anybody to join at this point. So if anybody has any other questions, they're welcome to ask as well.
Questions for?
I have a question. You said you took your son to see about depression. How? And they said no, he's fine. How do they diagnose depression? I mean, is there a clear cut?
I took him a few times, and there was a couple times when I sat in on it, but then a couple times when I thought that maybe I shouldn't sit in on it, because he's not going to tell him everything with his mom sitting there. And they basically came out and told me he was fine. And actually, when I took him, he went to Brighton Center for Recovery to recover from the heroin addiction. And they actually didn't pay, my insurance wouldn't pay for it because he didn't have a dual diagnosis, which they said he had no other mental issues. But I felt like he was depressed. I always felt like he was depressed. Way before he started marijuana when he was in 11th grade. I felt like he was a depressed kid. Because I could tell the difference between my son and my daughter and the way they handled and coped with things. My daughter had a much better way of self-soothing, and my son just didn't seem to have that. So I'm not quite sure how they do it, but they didn't see it with my son, apparently.
I mean, I have 4 kids, and I can, tell sometimes, at different periods of their growth where, I was a little concerned, about a couple of them at different points, but I was just wondering if, when they say no, they're fine, and, they do those
Yeah, they didn't
testing.
seem to find anything with them. I do think kids in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, I don't know if anybody remembers back then, but I know I didn't like myself in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. I don't know if many kids do. You got zits, you got hormones going, you got peer pressure, you got all this stuff going on. I really do think that's the time when schools and parents and everybody can work together to intervene at an earlier age.
Yeah, I think it's difficult at that age that Paul was describing, because you tend to say, well, that's just kids being kids, and being able to separate that from an issue that may be real. But it was interesting listening to your son's history, that it sounds like his issues began to escalate post high school.
Yeah, I was struggling with him with marijuana use when he was in 11th grade. His grades started plummeting. He was skipping school a lot. It was a major difference between, I never had a problem with him in school. He never got in trouble in school. He never, in any way, in any way, not one time. He was in sports. He was in hockey. He snowmobiled. He snow skied. He did everything outdoors. I never had to tell him to stay off video games. I never had to tell him to feed his dog. I just never had to really, I thought it would be my daughter, who's a little bit more rambunctious, that I would have to discipline more. Yeah, it did start in high school with marijuana use. And he did tell me it was a gateway drug. I think marijuana and alcohol both are gateways to anything that's more of a hard drug. Because I think with drug use, it just continues to progress, especially with those that have the genetic predisposition for addiction, which I feel like Johnny does. We have that on my side of the family and on his father's side of the family as well. So that's another thing that we have to watch for, but there's other situations where that doesn't happen as well. So there's just a lot of variables.
Yeah, you're right. There is a hereditary component to all of this, and I think sometimes we overlook that. But I think if we all look through our family history, you can kind of spot it, and that it's there.
Okay. Any other questions? Thanks for sharing that story. We want to segue into our discussion with with Jason and Mark and some of the other health professionals in the audience, and talk about an update of the state of mental health and overall awareness, social and emotional health of our students. And Mark and I were talking the other day about how, what you were saying, that it's, it often does start with some of the alcohol and marijuana use and leads into that. We need to be as proactive as possible at identifying students and doing everything we can to help not only the students but the families as well. So, Jason, sir, what's the state overall? Where do we see our students right now in high school and in middle school? All of that.
That's a huge question, but I think one thing someone brought up here already is we as a society tend to minimize problems, and we say kids are kids, like you alluded to that. Even what changed, I guess, since my parents and some of the new parenting styles is it age appropriate for a 4-year-old to shoot a pea across a dinner table? Probably, but they get a consequence when I grew up. They knew it was age appropriate. A 4-year-old was going to do that, but they got a consequence. Is it developmentally appropriate for an adolescent child to push the limit, to stay out later than their curfew? Yes, but they got a consequence. Now it seems to me that even health professionals and us adults, we say it's age appropriate, so we never draw the boundary. We never draw the line. We theorize, well, that's age appropriate, but we don't give the consequence. And that's a strong message to the kid, and we're seeing more and more in that. In terms of anxiety, I think it's really important to talk to the elementary school teachers. I know when I was down with Betty at Harvest, just since I was there, the rise in anxiety with our young kids just went through the roof. Kids on the spectrum, a lot of things, and part of it you can rationalize, well, we're doing better at identifying it and assessing it. I believe that's a piece of it, but there's a significant rise in anxiety with our kids across the board. Jason and the counselors see it all the time. Kids not coming to school, scared to death to come to school, scared to death to go into class. Social anxiety, the amount of people that walking through the halls who don't go out socially, you'd never know it. You know, they dress nice, they're popular in the hallways, but you talk to them, they haven't been out in 2 months socially because they're afraid of going out. Michelle can speak to that. She runs 2 groups on that, and she hears a lot of that. So I'm seeing a lot more mental health, substance abuse stuff. And another thing with substance abuse, we say, well, he's using, he must be depressed, or he's depressed, that's why he's using, almost like it's okay. And there's always been a war between the mental health side and the substance abuse side professionally. Which came first? It really doesn't matter because they all agree it's not healthy for a kid to be using. But like you said, you brought your child to counseling, and we talked about counseling. How many times kids go to counseling, they never even take a urine screen? To me, that's a no-brainer. If you go to counseling, whatever depression, whatever the present, that should be an automatic screen. Because I tell you, a lot of parents would be surprised what they find in that urine screen. You know, and talk about early intervention, the earlier we catch it, the better. I don't know if Jason or anyone wants to piggyback on that, but that's a big frustration for me, I know personally, is on paper we have a lot of resources, but in reality, very few quality resources. And then when you find one, I mean, we fill their plates.
And I think also part of that is it's a fit in therapy. And so you might take, someone one time to someone, and it just isn't a fit. Just like certain teachers and certain teaching styles are good, I think that's the same sort of thing in therapy. And so I get students all the time that say, I just sit there because I don't really like the person. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying, well, why don't you, let's look at someone else. And it's shocking for them a lot of times to say, like, oh, I can think about going someplace else. It's like, it's your money, it's your parents' money. They're willing to get you help and support to look someplace else. And I think that's another issue. Or a lot of times parents are like, well, we're going, they're not saying anything, they're not getting anything out of it 1 time or 2 times. But I know students that come down don't always tell me everything that they have to say the first time they see me. And I think it's just an impatience a lot of the time of saying, like, the process goes on for a year. It might go on for a period of time. And, and those sort of supports. And so I think it has to happen in a different way a lot of times, and not just one time to one person and saying, well, this didn't work, we tried it, and we crossed it off our list. And I think as a society, we're getting to a point where we like to cross things off our list, as opposed to really looking deeper and looking under the surface of things.
I think that's an important point, is that with mental illness, you have a lot of episodes that happen before it's diagnosed. And if it's diagnosed, you have many different types of chemical solutions that may work on one physiology, not another. Also, you have peer therapy work for one individual, may not work for another. Sometimes it's electrical stimulation of the brain that is used in some cases of depression. Medical marijuana is actually used as a way to address manic cycles within bipolar. So the challenge we have is that the research is all over the board. The physiology of every child is different. So we have to be very careful with generalizations because of the fact that it is different for every individual. Body chemistry is different. Now, the conversation about alcoholism. Is the alcoholism genetic or is it behavioral? The answer is probably yes. Maybe genetic in some people, be a genetic predisposition. Other people may be behavioral.
In my experience, I would say it's a genetic predisposition because I am genetically prone to addictions. So I've stopped drinking. You know, I spent a good portion of my late high school years, junior high and high school years. You know, I was an athlete and I was a, top 10 scholar, went to the School of Mines, so a really smart kid and whatnot. But, throughout most of high school, out of season, I partied, and it was not good because looking back on it, I can see that a lot of my social development stopped because of that. There are still things that I do very poorly because I spent a lot of high school not interacting with people appropriately, and not doing it so much poorly, but just not doing it, period. So you're talking about all the people who are not really going out and socializing with people. It is something that when you are that uncomfortable, this social phobia kind of thing, that, it's gonna come back 30 years from now, and they're not gonna have the skills to be able to, work in business, and it's not that is, well, yeah, and those are critical skills, and those are critical things that we need to make sure that the kids have some ability to recognize when this is going on. Not that the kids will, but someone around them will, and to be able to help them. Because I flamed out about 6 years ago, 5 years ago, and could no longer function. I was unable to run my business. I was unable to complete a job. Ended up, having a bunch of invoices out that they said they would not pay. So I ended up, basically, on the brink of losing the house and all the rest of that. I showed up at my doctor's office with Nancy, and he took one look at me and went, oh, and basically I was off work for 6 months, and I had a doctor's note that said it was okay. In my mind, it wasn't okay. That added even more to the burden of going, well, I cannot take care of my family. And it's not that, it was nobody's fault. But it was, it was something that should have gotten addressed or caught at some point. Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of times that people tried to help me, but I was unhelpable at the time.
Yeah. Mark, I want to get back to something that you said about the increase in anxiety. And I'll spin the clock back about half a century. And back when I was growing up, there was no cell phone, iPhones, there was no computers, there was no cable TV, there was no gaming systems, anything like that. It just seems like today.
You're pretty old.
Who knew?
Actually, we won't go there, Chief. We'll bring out those old football programs. But it seems like kids are getting bombarded with so much information is that, you know, is a contributing factor that, you know, we have information overload on young people?
Well, that's a big piece you brought up, but also just look at what we do academically.
Right.
What we throw at our kids in ninth grade, I got in college. Look at athletically, the changes in the last 6 years, what we throw at these kids.
Yep.
It's mind-boggling. The schemes we throw at them in football is what the Big Ten was running 7 years ago.
And how often they have to practice.
Yeah, and it's
how
year-round,
often
and
they
it's
have to-
commitment, and a lot of times you get kids in between two coaches. Well, it's season football, I should be at football, and the basketball coaches, well, you need to get your time in here, and, you know, we all struggle with it, and we put kids in the middle, and that's the shame, is it's really an adult issue. It's about the adult success, not the kids. It's not about what's best for the kids, it's all about our egos and what's best for us. And so I think what you brought up with the amount of information a kid can get, and we talked about it at one of our task force meetings. When I grew up, you had to be entrenched in the drug culture to know how to get it, where to get it, how to do it.
Right.
Now a fifth grader, with no intention of using, can go on the internet and within 10 minutes find out exactly how to cook meth. They can know exactly how to do synthetics, order synthetics, you know, scan urine screens from their parents, the little ones you can buy at home. So it's all there, and we give them all that information, so that I think that's a huge part. And I want to backtrack a little bit. We know it's not opinion about genetics. That's science, that's not opinion. We know there's a genetic, and you can still become addicted if you don't have the genetic. The joke is you have to work at it. And we know the second thing with outside of genetics about whether a person that's going to have trouble is the age of initial onset. It's always been true, it's scientifically proven, it's not opinion. So what we're trying to do is intervene on things that cause death. We're not telling kids don't you go. You know, we're really talking about things that can really change it. I'm glad and I hope you're okay if I bring up what you talked about.
Sure, absolutely.
You know, and I mentioned this to Graydon this morning. I give you a lot of credit because Kim has said, you know, Mr. Shuby, we met a couple times and we tried to intervene, and, you know, the marijuana started, and a lot of parents aren't as honest as Kim. A lot of parents will say, nope, never touch it, no one told me anything, no one tried to intervene, you know, and I give you a lot of credit because not only what you're doing, standing up and trying to make changes, but being honest, you know. A lot of parents aren't like that, and so not only are they getting a lot of information from the internet, cell phones, staying up late, not getting the sleep they need, but there's been a dramatic change with our adults in the society about giving the message, don't own your behavior. You know, character's character. It doesn't matter if you get out of trouble or not. And as adults, we're getting more messages today than we did 7 years ago about, hey, lie if it matters, be dishonest if it matters. And so that's another piece of this. And I think that feeds into depression, that feeds into mental health. Kids know, kids have a ton of character. Years ago, someone asked Rob White, are you going to believe a kid over me? And he said, yep. Because my experience is kids are more honest to us than adults are. That's a strong statement. That's a true statement.
Yeah. It is.
And we need to look in the mirror as adults.
And then what about, you know, life-changing events, you know, whether there's a change in the family structure, you know, a death in the family, a parent loses a job, things like that. Are those contributing factors as well that'll kind of, you know, tip kids that way?
Yeah, and you know, there's a lot of research on trauma related to use and trauma related to depression and anxiety and things. But what we do know is kids are resilient. So when you have healthy supports, I saw in some of your handouts that you gave me this morning about the assets. We've been bringing search in for years and years and years. If kids simply have 3 more adults in their life outside their family, healthy adults, their chance of success is skyrocketing. And what we mean by that is, like, I trust that if he knows my son's gonna up to no good, he's gonna call me and say, look, I'm hearing negative things about your son, just wanna let you know. It doesn't happen all the time. We talk about peer pressure among kids, there's more peer pressure among our adults. They're afraid to call each other, they're afraid to rock the boat, they're afraid to cause conflict. These are adults telling kids, you need to be honest, you need to have integrity, you need to fight peer pressure. They're not willing to do it. Well, I'm not going to call Mr. Graydon. What would he think if I said this about his son? Then his son will try to be me. And they don't do it. So that's part of the problem, too. I don't know if Jason or anyone else
I
wants.
totally agree with that.
And I also want to say, if you look back, and again, I didn't know how much my parents made. I didn't know how much, you know, the kids just, I'm just baffled at the amount of things that kids know nowadays that are adult, like Mark mentioned earlier, they're adult issues. You know, they shouldn't know what their family finances are, and that becomes a stress for that student. And so you see that stress, well, we can't do this because of this. And then there's appearances, and you know, trying to keep up with appearances is so prevalent here. And I just think those things are tenfold what they were even 5 or 6 years ago. This amount of information that students have about their family culture dynamics. Well, mom slept with this other person, and I'm like, how would you possibly know that? You know, well, dad talked to me about it, or those kind of things. And it's just, those are some of the things that, again, we talk about it being a parent issue. It's such an adult issue from us that, you know, we expose our kids to so much more than they were exposed to 5 and 6 and 10 and 15 years ago. You know, not just from technology's sake, but also from just our own mouths.
Does that exposure cause more stress and anxiety?
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, I think, and I'm not trying to,
Well, I mean,
I don't mean to jump at it in that regard, but you know, you see the ramifications from the students, because now they're not just focusing on their schoolwork and this test and this friend or girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever the case may be. Also about the family finances. Is mom and dad gonna be fighting when they get home, and if it's over me, and the blame, you know, what role did I? And students always, adolescents always just feel that they're somehow responsible. You know, and that's such a pulling force, and starts when they're so little. My wife, we were talking last night, she's also a school social worker here, and she was in a group, and she asked a young lady, what have you learned from the group? And she said, hey, when my mom and dad fight, it's not my fault. And that's a second grader. You know, so I think those are the things that, I mean, at that young of age, that young lady didn't know that was the case. So you kind of fast forward that to, you know, and you know, kids and parents can't be friends. That's just what, I think that's a huge issue. So
that was going to be my question, is do you think that because of the pace of life nowadays, that the parents are away from their kids, and so they want to be their friend instead of a parent? It's got to have some kind of effect on, the kid needs a parent. They might not say it, but
I remember
they need that.
I remember a shift, you know, back in therapy days, when I was doing therapy, a shift, and I remember a parent that came in and was like, well, you know, in order for me to get my son to tell me what's going on, I have to be friends with him. And I remember that so clearly at the shift, and when that happened, you know, then I was like, you know, maybe that's an aberration, it's not gonna happen, it's an outlier. But it wasn't, it became the norm of like this kids and parents sharing too much. And then when they have to draw a line as a parent, it becomes difficult, because now, how can you be my friend and then all of a sudden say I'm grounded? And it's hard for kids to grasp that. They're just not, you know.
Yeah, I think when we talk about parenting, I think I learned a long time ago, there's probably 1,000 ways to parent, and most of them are right. And a lot of it is what you're comfortable with, and a lot of it has to do with the way you were raised and things like that, the values that you were brought up with. But I think that, you know, as we have this discussion, we need to be careful that we don't focus on the parenting end of it and say, well, it's, you know, we have flawed parenting that's creating this. I'm sure there's some of that, but it's certainly probably a small.
That's actually a lot of what I'm trying to do. And every parent makes mistakes, one way or another. I know I made mistakes. I don't think I was quite a friend to my kids, but I did try to really make sure that I enforced open communication with them, so that, you know, I'd sit in their bedrooms with them alone, talk about what's going on in school, you know, kind of be a little more cool so I could be a little bit of a friend. But I was really hard on them too. I was very much a tough love mom. I mean, I put the club on Johnny's car and I wouldn't let him know, and he'd say, well, why did you do it? And I'd say, you know the rules, you figure it out. You know, so I mean, it wasn't like I think you can kind of be that way enough to allow your kids to feel like they can talk to you, but also still enforce and not enable the bad behavior that they're doing. And I tried as hard as I could to do that. But I do want to make sure that we don't focus completely on the parents, because it's a multiple faceted issue that in very deep rooted, that's going to take many different, you know, people from the community to be able to handle this the right way. But I think the first part about it is, like Mark said, we gotta stop being embarrassed to talk about it. I mean, if you're not, I wasn't ashamed of my son. And that's the first thing I wanna say. He got into a drug he didn't know that was this bad. Did he make a mistake? Did he do the wrong thing? Did he act up in high school? Yes. Yes, he did. And it was wrong, he knew it. And because of the open communication I had with him, he came and asked me for help throughout the whole entire time he was trying to get better. But it's just, it takes everybody to talk about it, everybody to talk about it in the open, admit what's going on, and not keep it, you know, under everybody's hat. And as a community, we can come together. Just like you said, we have adults. If I could have found 3 other men to be a good example for my son, I think that may have helped. My son didn't really have a lot of examples of good men. My dad is a great man, my brother's a great man, but they don't live around here, so he didn't get to see them as often. So I think that's a wonderful thing that you just said. But it's gonna take the community as a whole to come together to help these young people and help them find the right direction and the right decisions. And to hide about the problem is definitely not gonna help.
Jason, talk to me about the depression and bipolar work you're doing. How you got that started? Because as Todd referenced, most young people doesn't happen until age 19, 20, 21, 22, when they're out of the high school setting. But when it happens, the parents don't know what's going on, and they don't have the resources. So if we can get the education to young people prior to the episodes happening, and get the parents educated before the episodes happen, it's a wonderful thing. So talk to me about, you know, how you got started and where you think that needs to go.
It was, I think our previous principal, Ben Williams, was approached 3 years ago from U of M, Depression, Rachel Upjohn, with a grant that was funded through all Washington County schools about peer-to-peer depression awareness campaign. And we've done that with Brian Bruckman, who's back here. Him and I together have taken students to U of M each October to work in a conference with other schools around the county. I think it was 10 schools this year. And Brian, feel free to, if I'm missing something, certainly chime in. And we've done that for 3 years, and they have to come up with a presentation, some kind of way to try to show to the student body reducing stigmas and about depression, anxiety, and bipolar. And we piloted with this class, and we've done AP classes, we've done health classes, done a pre-test and a post-test to try to measure how much the stigmas have been reduced over time. And I think last year was somewhere close to 73% of the people who saw it. But it's an issue of trying to get all the classes with all the time that, you know, we're crunched in for time to get classes to take time away to see the things that we're doing as well. This year they went at a multi-pronged, which I thought was great. Not only having the presentation from Corner Health, which also spoke at the U of M conference, but they also were at lunches, and we did like a true false. We went through the kids read all 3 lunches and did true false. They were handing out these green wristbands. It says you don't know unless you grow. You won't grow unless you know about stigma and raising awareness. And they would ask them true false questions about depression, bipolar, and those kind of things, anxiety. And they would give them the correct answer if they were wrong, and then they would give them a wristband and kind of talk about it. So I think it was really well received this year, and we heard a lot of positive feedback. So we had almost 200 students and teachers. I think 7 or 8 teachers brought down almost 200 students. We really targeted 9th and 10th graders to try to, again, the younger population, they're getting in high school, they're getting more of the stresses, and hopefully kind of raising some awareness in that regard.
How are we gonna get the education to the parents?
That's a great question.
We've actually been talking a little bit about this. It's going to be one of the steps we're talking about coming up. Is we do think that's important, and although we don't want to harp on, you know, flawed parenting, I think we do want to focus in on parent education and making sure that parents actually know this information, and from an early onset of getting into the school district. Like, it is too late to wait till high school. So how do we start when parents first come in as kindergarten students to talk about not from the standpoint of drugs and alcohol at that point, but, you know, risk factors and social health, wealth. We need to keep that early on, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on.
I just wanted to touch on, as this conversation goes, and it ties back to things that Trustee Delhay and I learned. this is a complex issue. And any one of the areas that we've talked about tonight, we could dive in and spend a lot of time. And so I think the challenge for us really is to think about, okay, what are, in a complex world, what are the things that we can address? And so one of the tools associated with this is to really look at this from a comprehensive standpoint, and then decide what are some of the areas we feel are going to be able to have the most return on investment for us moving forward. So I guess that's the kind of the juxtaposition we're in terms of trying to balance, there's so much to do and so much that can be done. How do we make some of the decisions?
Right. And narrow the focus enough that we can do one area well at first and then.
Well, not only that, but maybe develop, for use of a better term, a checklist of red flags that, if you see this in your child, that should be a red flag. I had some issues with one of my sons, and looking back on it, it probably started back in about the 5th, 6th grade. He just couldn't get assignments done. And that, you say, well, he's lazy, can't do it, and all that. But, that's one thing about depression, it can be right in front of you and you just can't do it. And it's something that, for those of us who don't have it, it's a little maddening. You're saying, okay, come on. And I've also learned you can't talk anybody out of depression. The old positive pep talks ring very hollow when it comes to depression.
One of the things I'd like to see us focus on as a Saline area schools and the Board of Education is this issue of pressure and stress. The kids are highly stressed in this community. I think it's a huge issue. We're highly stressed as educators to make the kids perform at a high level. Now, how do you slow that cause down so that it becomes a more healthy situation? I have no answer for that, but I think it's a huge issue.
And it's hard with the, you feel that pressure all the time as a parent to, oh my gosh, my son isn't taking the AP courses that he should be taking. All these other kids are taking the AP courses, he should be. And Mark addressed that when we were talking the other day, and it hit home for me. It was like, yeah, my son probably shouldn't be taking 2 AP courses this year, but but he's in them. I mean,
because the kids were so stressed out
right.
in the AP courses, they were stressing him out.
Do you guys want to chime in a little bit, Brian?
That's one of the things that at our professional development days that one of our groups is doing, the School of Climate and Culture group. One of our focuses has been on the fact that the kids are so stressed and what are some of the different things that we might be able to do about it. We've talked about, homework and athletics and AP classes and all sorts of stuff, and had some surveys go out to staff and just trying to brainstorm some different ways that we can try to help the kids reduce stress. A big issue that we do have is somewhat not driven by us, but more driven by like colleges even. I've got to get into this place and this is what they want, so I have to take this. And sometimes it's even regardless if they're ready to take it or able to take so many of these AP classes, whatever. It's just the fact that I've got to get here and this is how I can do it and this is what it is. And it's hard. I mean, you're just kind of battling that, more top down, what someone else wants is dictating what our kids are doing. So that's
2 weeks ago, how many kids were ready to blow during ACTs and MME and tryouts and finals, and my son was up 6 a.m. for tryouts and school all day and tryouts after school and coming home and trying to study and falling asleep with a book on, and it's
and lots of things that we do or that happen go against here we are educated people, but go against all the research in terms of what's healthy and what's the right things to do. It's hard though, because some ways you feel hand-tied as staff or even as parents after getting the kids ready for the next level or at least to the place that they want to go. So that's kind of a big issue we start to see with juniors and seniors.
So are colleges really saying that the more AP classes, the better?
Colleges are not going to be the black and white in terms of, you need to have this or this, but it's your more highly selective schools are going to tell you that. For instance, we're very close to the University of Michigan. We'll have about 1/3 of our kids each year who will apply there. They'll have about 42,000 applications for about 6,000 or 7,000 spots. And just because we're so close there and so many of our kids want to go there, it's always that thing of like, well, what do I need to get there? Always comes the question. And it's kind of different for what it would be for a Saline school versus like Manchester or something like that. will tell you, and it's no offense against Michigan, it's a fantastic school, but they'll tell you, you know, we want to get the best and brightest from each of the schools. Well, what does that look like for Saline? You know, and it's, well, we want you to have 3 to 5 AP classes. We want you to have 29 in your ACT. We want you to have 3.9, and you know, and then you also, and I entertained this phone call twice today, that crushing behavior or crushing, you know, reality when you didn't get in and so did, and the effect that that has on everything, and it's hard. You know, it's hard for us working with the kids, but also as the parent and the kids themselves. So they won't put the big number on it, but you know, we've got great kids and they want to go to some really nice places. Problem being, everybody else who applies there looks really good too.
One tricky thing about AP classes is that if your school does not have AP classes, the kid does not get disqualified or downgraded on their admission score if you don't have AP programs. But if you have them, they have to take as many as they possibly can within area of study. So it's like, either if you're this district offers it, the kid has to take the classes to get the score on the admissions application. You don't have it at all, then that's okay. We don't score you on that.
Yeah, I mean, for
Can I
instance,
say something about that? My daughter chose not to take AP classes. She could have, but she chose not to. She had a 3.65, I think, grade point average. She worked full-time. She worked 2 jobs at sometimes. She was in sports. She did a lot of volunteer work, and she was accepted at MSU, no problem. So I'm not quite sure, you know, I told both of my kids, I'd rather you be more well-rounded than I want you to have work ethic, and if you like the sport, I want you to be in it, but, you know, do some volunteer work as well. And she's just extremely ambitious, so she did get all of those things, and that, she was worried sick because she wanted to go to MSU, and they accepted her anyway based on that. She had no AP classes whatsoever, and she ended up going to CMU anyway. So I don't know if you have to have AP classes to get in. I think that there's a lot of different factors that they consider in these colleges.
And it's just competitive nature that we
you don't necessarily need AP classes for, you know, all the schools. It's just, you know, for certain ones, that's what they're looking for, and the competitiveness. And ideally, I'd like the kids to take an AP class because they have a real interest in that area. So many times, it's not necessarily because they have such a big interest in the area. It's because I can get that on my transcript, and I can get a particular score.
Except Raphael, go. I think we're going to move on.
I just want to make one quick statement. We're talking about AP courses, and I think when we live in a community where kids there's pressure to be successful, and whatever your definition of success, whatever that may be, but there is pressure to compete for those selective schools like University of Michigan. So for students, they compare themselves with other students. You know, that student's taking 3 AP courses right now. Well, I should probably take 2 or 3 myself. You know, that person's taking 2 AP courses, a CTE program, this and that, volunteering work, and their varsity sport. I should be doing the same thing. And that's just the community we live in. I think that has a good and a bad side. Wanting to, you know, be the best you can be, I think is a great thing in our community. I think the fact that students, high school students, want to take, you know, AP Bio and AP Comparative Government, right? Even if they don't have much interest in AP Comparative Government, they might, you know, learn something great in that class, and they might gain interest in that class. For example, Ms. Monahan is my counselor, and she encouraged me to take AP Psychology. Didn't have that much interest in the class, but after taking it, I love AP Psychology. It's a great class. So I think in that aspect, taking AP courses and having that pressure is almost a good thing, because it gives you, you know, motivation to compete and want to do better for your own personal self.
In reality, numbers show that any kid who takes 1 AP class, it's a good training class for them to understand the expectations. 1 is not 10. 1 is 1. By the same token, the competition still exists. My daughter is now a freshman at Michigan, and she walked into her econ class this past fall and saw a whole bunch of kids from Saline. All the 4.036 kids. So all of a sudden the competition's still there. Didn't change, because you're like, Those are all the kids are National Merit Scholars. They all got 4.0s, all got 36 ACTs, and they're now my competition in college.
Right.
So the reality is the competition's always going to be there.
And I think that we would be remiss if we don't look at that. We are a success-driven community. We have parents who are either work for the universities, work for a health system, work for a corporation, own their own business. If you just look at the demographics and socioeconomics of the Saline community, and many of us came here because of the school district. We wanted the best for our kids. It was kind of like, my grandfather did better than his dad, my dad did better than his dad, I've done better than my dad, and that bar gets continually higher and higher and higher.
And the best has to include good mental health.
Yeah, so for my boys to get over that bar, it's a lot harder than it was for me. And so I think we should keep that in mind as we frame the discussion, is that part of it is we're a success-driven community, and with that comes a whole different set of pressures.
Just real quick, I think we've done a great job of highlighting all the issues, and we could probably go on forever, but we have our professionals here, and I know they might not want to say, but I'm sure they have ideas of what is that next step? What programs do we need? I mean,
well, let's not go there yet. Let's go with, we want to hear what they do. I think we've talked a lot about what the issues are, because there are, Mr. Graydon said it well, that we could go in so many directions with issues and how they all play together. But one of the things that's important, we do next to recognize, they're doing a lot of great things already and working with groups and kids, and we want to hear from our counselors and Jason, what are some of the things we're doing? What are some of the groups we're running now? What are some of the ways we're trying to educate our kids and our parents, and then get to some of the action steps down the road. So, we want to hear from these guys about that, and what are we doing right now? What's our current programming?
Well, first of all, a couple things is we keep on coming back to, we don't want to blame parents, and we know that the vast majority of our parents are awesome. That's what makes this district great, is our parents are awesome. But we do have issues, so it's really balanced of, knowing that we have quality parents, we have quality staff, but we still have issues. I know we have a lot of clinical people who work for the school that did private practice, ran treatment centers, so we have a lot more, I don't want to say a lot more, but we have a lot of quality people in our district. And I know why I came to Saline is when I worked at treatment centers before I came here, there was a huge difference between Saline and other districts, and that's honest. When you guys, the staff would call us, the staff would follow through. When we called Saline Schools and talked to Judy Miller, Janie Frazier, whoever worked back then, is they knew what kid was in treatment. That might sound like that should be a no-brainer. That didn't happen. We'd call schools, they had no idea the kid was even anywhere. We had counselors from here calling us back after the kid, hey, I'm seeing, he's been out 2 weeks now, I'm seeing this, what do you think? They actually cared. They actually followed through. So one thing we talked about this earlier today is at the Washtenaw and Livingston County, when we always meet as coordinators, there were so many districts saying, your administration lets you do these programs? I'm like, let us, they want us. They said, what are we, so we've always been supported. We have, I will walk through this a little bit with you guys. We're amazing. We brought in we're talking international specialists. In 08, 09, we brought in a program called Take It Back, Penny Norton from Face, world-renowned person. We did an amazing program. She told us our kids could go to Washington. They did such a great job. Some of those kids have since graduated and coming back to work. I think that's a testament to this district. I see staff members who went to school here, they come back to work here, and their thought process is not in my backyard, not in my school. We're going to take care of this issue. In 09 and 10, we brought in James Bradshaw, a world-renowned guy, and that's the problem. We market it, we educate people, we put it on the internet, we put flyers, and we get 30 people. I mean, we're talking world-renowned. In 10, 11, we brought in John Underwood from the American Athletic Institute. Everyone thought it was about sports. We had a standing room only, but it was really scientists talking about the devastating effects of alcohol and drug use on the body, not only of adult athletics, but especially on adolescent athletics. We switched gears ago in 2012 to try to target elementary school parents. We knew that elementary school parents traditionally are more involved and real are active in the school, so Betty worked real hard with me at Harvest and the other principals to target parents. And our SAD kids and other students would train for months and we'd get 5 people. And it wasn't about marketing. It was because we have third graders out to soccer till 9:30 at night, and that's more important. And that's okay. We did provide this stuff. Last couple of years, we've changed to trying to look at what can we do on the internet. I know we lose some of the conversation like we're doing here tonight, but at least we get the education piece. The other thing is, you'd be amazed at what we do in our curriculum in terms of alcohol and drug use. We might even do too much neuroanatomy in 9th grade on alcohol and addiction genetics. What you talked about with the social emotional stagnation, that's the adolescent failure syndrome. And we spent 20 minutes in every 8th grade class talking about that. Kids are emotionally frozen at the age they begin using on a regular basis. That is not opinion, that's known. So we're seeing kids who start using at age 14, at age 22, they might own their own business, they might be successful, but interpersonally, they're frozen. They interact on life as a 14-year-old. So that's the adolescent failure syndrome. This other assumption we do is if we tell kids about it, they're not going to do it. How many times have we told kids don't get your sleep or don't have your cell phone next to you during bedtime? They still do it. So this thought that just because we educate them, they're going to change their behavior, that's totally false. That's where we come in as adults to follow through with that. 7th grade, we spend social norming, and a big thing about social norming is even, let's say, 25% of our high school kids use on a regular basis. We're talking, every weekend or daily marijuana use. 25% might be a small percentage, but of 1,800 kids, that's a whole lot of faces. That's a whole lot of kids. So kids need to hear that, yeah, but it feels like everyone I know is using, but in reality, the vast majority are staying clean. The problem we have today, the big switch is now, if you look at sports used to be a protective factor. We now know it feeds into the culture of using. That's not my opinion, that's national data. So it's a lot of your real popular kids sometimes, the real, ones we put out in front that kids are going, oh my God, if they only knew what was going on. I'm not saying every kid, and I'm not pointing fingers, but let's get educated about this issue. 9th grade, we spend about 4 days on a lot of the genetics, the neurobiology of addiction, progression of use. We switched a little bit of that and went more to the Michigan model of more student-led discussions and research presentations. That has mixed reviews. Again, there's a payoff going that way. After 9th grade, it gets really tough because you don't have consistent classes. And that's the real tough, but from 5th grade on, we're pretty stacked. And I know DARE gets a lot of bad press nationally, and I would love to talk about the research people who do it, because any good research, you control as many variables as you can, and there's no way you can control social variables, okay? Also, our DARE program is a lot different than any other DARE program, because Dave Range lives it, breathes it, loves it. Kids know him. In a lot of districts, the DARE officer is the one who isn't doing his job on the road, and he's made to go in the classroom. He hates it, kids know it, and it's not the same dynamic, so don't tell me DARE doesn't work. If I took DARE off the sheet of paper and I gave it to you guys, you'd love the curriculum, because it's conflict management, it's problem solving, it's everything we want our kids to do. But if I put the DARE logo back on it, you'd say, oh, this doesn't work, without even looking at it, okay? So 5th grade, we do DARE. 6th grade, we do Healthy Hearts, which is an amazing partnership with St. Joe's. 7th grade, we do the social norming. 8th, we start with progression of use. 9th, a lot more of the treatment stuff, physiological, dynamic stuff. Also in mental health, we really talk about depression, the difference between depression and feelings. Because one thing we really see, and it's so frustrating, and counselors can talk about it. On one hand, we don't let kids be kids and have feelings. We don't let them feel. We don't let them feel sad. We don't let them feel mad. We don't let them feel hurt or ashamed. And sometimes kids who are just feeling are just thrown meds at. You know, some doctor said, well, I can help you out with that, and here's some Xanax or here's some Prozac or whatever. And then the kids who are really suffering with depression, you know, it's so hard to get them to the right place. And we talked about the neurobiology, every kid's different. It's tough enough for an adult to find the right meds. Times that by 100 with an adolescent, you know. So we try to educate kids that if you do suffer from this, it gets so overwhelming. You go to the doctor and you're on this med for 3 months, and then you're off for a month. You try another med for 3 months. You're off for a month. And kids, they want what they want when they want it. We know that, and so we try to talk them through that part. We had a great relationship with Corner Health. Jason brought them back recently, but we used to bring them in almost every year, 9, 10, 11 years ago, doing the skits and stuff. We institutionalized it more, so we do it more as a district. Our state kids took it over, and we kind of institutionalized it. So that's kind of what I know. I don't know if you want to throw more in there.
You want to add, or you guys, any of the programming additional?
This year, we again with U of M, the adolescent depression, awareness program has been actually embedded into our health classes as a pilot. So again, trying to reduce stigmas, with mental health through our 9th graders. Again, targeting that younger population, the students. And then, I mean, beyond that, I don't know if you're looking at that part as specifically or more of the global things with bullying and grief and loss and some other things that we run as groups as counselors and and social workers and those kind of things as well. We do a lot of those where we hit groups of students. The problem becomes time. Students don't have time, when you have all the things we've talked about before with time and education and academics and sports, it's really hard to find, the time to do some of the other groups and things that you're not taking them out of classes that they need to be in, that they already feel stressed for not being in. If that makes any sense.
Like Brian and Michelle and Marie, is she still here? They run Link Crew, and so we know that when kids are valued and when kids are respected, they thrive. When you see these guys work at Link Crew, I mean, the whole gym is welcoming in the incoming 9th grade. It's not about hazing. It's about welcoming. It's a celebration. They do Link Crew, follow up with Link Crew.
And same thing at the middle school level when the kids come in, they do web. And I think what the picture we need to paint, though, is that there's a lot going on, and you all are doing a very, very good job of educating. We need to figure out other ways. We need to figure out more other steps we can take. And that combination of the complexity of the parents' involvement and the students, because we want to make sure that we are highlighting that there are a lot of things going on in the district that are going very well. And we'll get there in a minute to talk a little bit more about that. But one of the things I did want to talk a little bit more about is how do we identify students that are at risk? And once we do that, what are some of the action steps that we're taking to actually go out and okay, we know this student's having a problem. Well, how are we doing that? I know that we talk about, well, there might be 20, 25% of students using times. How are we going out to really try to identify the students and give them that one-on-one support they need?
That's a tough question. Well, first of all, we talked about it today. If you take a national leader in here, they walk in and say, well, you're at-risk students, they're obese, they're not involved with sports, and they don't care about their academics. Well, that's not our at-risk kid. Our at-risk kid is the opposite. Probably working out too much. Probably a lot of eating disorders. A lot of kids are underweight. A lot of kids are, highly achieving, so high that they get, 4 hours, 5 hours a night. So at-risk kid can be anyone. It's not just the kid who, comes from a broken family or whatever the stereotype of at-risk is. And that's important because we lose sight of those kids. And they're just, when you talk to them, they have just as much anxiety. They have cuts on their arm. Once you talk to them and they open up and they show you. They have the drug and alcohol issues. You would never think of it because they have a 3.9. They're captain of this team or, all state this or that. But those are the at-risk kids. They're just as at risk. What we try to do is, and we get in a lot of trouble for it, but when we hear something, we act on it. And so if we hear something about a kid, and I stand in the hall every day, Julie really wants, and rightfully so, stay up in the hall, and you hear things. And kids are walking by, did you hear so-and-so was drunk? And then you hear so-and-so was passed out, and then you match up who the so-and-so is, and then you figure out, you call the so-and-so down, and of course, the so-and-so says, no way, but you call the parent, and that's where it really gets, we have a hard enough time when, you know, we catch a kid red-handed, we're still wrong and in trouble a lot of times. But when you just say, hey, I've been hearing this kind of stuff, but I know as a parent, if Mr. Ellis calls me and says, hey, I don't know if it's true, but I heard your son was at a party last week and he was drinking, I'm taking him out to dinner because he might have saved my kid's life. But that's me, and I must be crazy because that doesn't seem like that's par for the course. It's what do you think you're doing? Bad mouthing my son. So we still do it anyway. So when we hear those things in the hall, I think counselors can speak to when they see the change in grades and things of that nature, and they meet with the kid or the parent.
I mean, we have different ways of receiving referrals and things. Teachers often reach out to us. Parents will call us. Other students come down concerned about their friends. So there's not one set checklist we have, but we definitely, it's kind of a school-wide support. And if a friend is concerned enough, they'll come down, they'll reach out and try to help. But it does get a catch-22 because you then have to, if you don't have a real, significant relationship with this person, you have to, try to build some trust and kind of get to it. So it's important, but we do identify as best we can. And for groups, there are the social workers and counselors, we do run some groups, and oftentimes we reach out to teachers. A grief group, for example, Mrs. James has really been an integral part of letting us know parents that may have passed or a friend or someone close to the family. We reach out to those students and invite them to be part of the group, as well as self-injury. We often, hear from other students when we talk to the student that's self-injuring, and we've invited them to be part of the group. We definitely stress confidentiality with all these groups. What stays in that group, does not leave among the halls. And we've been very, knock on wood, successful, and it feels pretty, like these kids are feeling pretty healthy. And they don't always just, sometimes there's a dip, but we work through it. That's why but I'll say one more thing and then I'm done. I'm talking a lot. It's hard because we do have kind of the pull-out of the classroom to meet with these students. But what Mark and I do with our self-injury group is we rotate the hour every week. So, and sometimes they're not afraid to tell us that I can't come down, second hour I have a test. And we understand, and the rest of the group understands and is very accepting. So.
Is there a permanent, peer, if they're uncomfortable coming to counselor or something, is there a peer group that they can always go to talk to about issues they're seeing?
We're trying to really get that up and running for the last 2 years with Link Crew having, being assigned, a mentor program. But I would say for the juniors and seniors, they're not seeing those benefits yet of that, but that's something we're trying to do.
And that's hard too, because, as a peer or even as a, high school student who's a couple years older, you listen and you whatever, but you're not necessarily trained in what else do you do, so it's part of that encouraging, if you are a mentor or peer mentor, what do you do with the kids? You hear this, what are your next steps? What should you be doing? We always encourage, because they're going to tell their peers 1,000 times more than what they may an adult. But it's that thing of when you do hear these things, how can you get them to a trusting adult to, to kind of open those doors of communication and trust and start to, get the process working.
You raised a great point about eyes and ears everywhere, and the idea of being in the hallway, great idea. Food service staff, bus drivers, other support staff, what training do you provide them in this area so that because they're riding those buses for an hour in some cases, they hear a lot more raw conversation than you ever hear in the hallway. What kind of training do we have for our drivers and our food service people and other support staff? Do we provide training for them on how to deal with these topics?
Actually, I'll jump in, and I don't know if we want to, I know Wendy Beardsley's in the back of the room. Wendy wants to talk about some of the assist training that we've done in the past that included members of all across, because for that very reason. And that was kind of suicide awareness. Wendy, do you want to talk a little bit about that program?
We did Safe Talk is what and then some of the staff has been trained in assist. Safe Talk, I think almost all the staff 3 years ago was trained how to recognize the signs of someone who might be exhibiting thoughts of suicide, and then how to safely get them to help. Was it roughly 60 or 90 have been trained in assist, where they actually can do the intervention. So I'm not sure if the bus staff was included in that, were they?
All groups were represented.
It's probably something that could be repeated as staff, the turnover.
That's what I'm wondering. We have nobody on staff, so that staff that was trained here is probably not here tonight. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, it's hard to know, but yeah.
So,
And can they have that same type of training for being able to identify somebody that may be getting involved in drugs?
Right, that's what I'm trying to get to is,
Yeah.
when I look at the eyes and ears, food service workers, our office staff, the paraeducators, the drivers, they're seeing students in their own environment, not the class environment. And the more awareness we can give them, and it is a problem because we have a high turnover rate in those areas compared to other staff positions. But they're the ones that are the first line of defense to the conversation.
So would it be beneficial for us to look at a specific case and then try to generalize outwards from that? Because we had a very significant recent specific case where Saline students were involved in some very troublesome activities. I mean, would that be a case that we could say that some of these Saline students, we should have, or we could have noticed some behaviors and
Well, I think with a lot of our students, we are doing a good job of recognizing some of the signs and doing what we can to support. We just need to keep trying to do more. What we were talking about the other day, and I was talking to Mark about this in here, is trying to get to the parents and the kids at an earlier age to sort of start this, we were using the term institutionalize, the healthy part of our community from very young, because it seems like a lot of this is cropping up in middle school and high school, but how can we set the stage a lot earlier when the parents are very involved with the school district? Can we figure out a timeline of events where we have a captive audience of parents that we're really trying to work through education right when they come in as kindergarten students? And I think that's something we should explore that we haven't explored before, to really dive in at that level. And because I do feel from talking to Jason, the counselors, that kids are being identified at the high school level. And kids that are getting into trouble, there are some of those warning signs, and they're doing, really appropriate steps to get to talk to the parents, get them help outside of school. But it seems that, it's like everything in education. The earlier we get to parents and kids, we talk about literacy. If kids are proficient in literacy by the time they reach the end of third grade, that's going to springboard them for a life of success. We need to try real early on, and we're thinking that we will put together a smaller task force or committee with a limited number of people that can really work on some of those steps, some things that we actually can focus on that we haven't done before.
We talked about that transition between, I think a big transition is between Heritage and the middle school. That a lot of, especially for your first kid, going from the 4th, 5th, they're still very elementary age, and all of a sudden they're jumping to this middle school, and it's a whole new world in there. And I think grabbing those parents as they switch from one to the other and talking to them about it and helping them recognize some of the things they're going to see when they go there, I think would be very helpful.
And that may be things like minimize stress and how to find proper balance, and you don't need to, have your kids in 3 sports. I mean, some of those things earlier on.
Like you said, the kids, 6, 7, and 8 don't like themselves, and dealing with that, and
some of that.
Could it be a
normal?
Right.
Could it be a topic from each grade level? Maybe not grade level, each school. When you start at Woodland or Pleasant Ridge, the parents, there's some topic that you start with at that age, and then when they get to Heritage, it's the next step. Then the middle school. It seems to me that the conversation always keeps coming back to the parents, and it's just the information they don't have. It's not that they're doing anything wrong, they just don't have the information. Right. And it's the same at our task force. We have the people that want to be here. How do you get the people that
Exactly.
are aware, so
Where do you get the
now we
captive
need
audience?
to, exactly.
Where do you get
exactly.
the groups?
Mr. Shuby,
where
we've
they're all
talked
there?
about this
Mhm.
before.
Yeah.
We need to have them in the room somewhere.
At the task force, I came up with a crazy idea of, you know, how we have to, and I don't know if you guys still do this, you know, because my kids have been out of school, but we have to fill out all these emergency forms and everything else before they can even get their schedule. Well, how about getting the parents into the auditorium and having a talk with them?
Thanks for saying just
I
that.
mean,
You want
why,
your
I'd
schedule,
rather
guess
do
what?
that than have, you
But I was,
know.
seriously, I was thinking,
Yeah.
one
The
thing,
parents have to pick up the schedule
Right.
rather than
Yeah.
the
what
kids.
you could do an online, awareness program. The parent has to go through and complete before they get access to the electronic schedule.
Well, we talked about doing that at conferences. You have that wait time before a conference. They're in a meeting with someone else, you're sitting there doing a tutorial or whatever at a computer while, and until that's complete, you don't get to go in for your conference. When are the
Exactly.
parents captive and when are they gonna actually participate in?
We've learned a few things about communication. We try to communicate all the time to parents, but some parents aren't being communicated to.
You can't get a
And so-
schedule.
And
Yeah,
so
you don't
so
get
it's
a
like,
schedule.
it's just that, it's finding those captive moments where we know we've got 95% of the parents. When we send out emails weekly, we might be getting 3% of the parents reading that. Who knows?
That's what I was
So
using
it's
the
like,
idea
we've
of.
gotta figure
that
out
way
when
the
we have.
captive
it.
moments.
Mhm.
They gotta get
And can-
scheduled. You wanna get scheduled, you can, here you gotta do this questionnaire.
And encourage
Here's
conversation with
depression,
your
here's
kids at all
bipolar,
times.
here's alcohol, here's all the symptoms and signs to look for. Sign off, you're taking it, and they have to take that every year. So every
Every year,
fall,
well,
they
you do
remind
with
you.
the other stuff too. I
Exactly.
used to think, oh my gosh, I don't have any time to do this right now, but guess what? I did it anyway, right then, because I needed to get my kids a schedule. And I think most parents do wanna do that, so they would show up or they'd fill out your questionnaire.
I wonder if it would sink in more though, when you have Mr. Shuby or Mr. Pickett
Talking,
standing in
yes.
front of them.
Yeah, I do
If
too,
I do it
yes.
online, I'm gonna have the TV on, I'm gonna,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, how many people are signing
It's
that
not as
handbook
hard
form
hitting. You
without
need,
being
I think you need the emotion in it.
You do. I'm
Because
thinking like bloodborne pathogens that we have to do as a staff, you know, if you don't get it at 90% or 100%, you gotta go back. And you gotta redo it again. So if you're watching on television, you're not gonna be able to click through, and if you don't, you truly, and if you are able to watch television and do it, you truly know what the issues are.
Right.
And you can always say, you know, for follow-on information, the first night of school, Mr. Shuby will have a presentation in the auditorium, we'll encourage you to stop in, we'll talk about these topics. You put it in there after the 8:30, finish your walkthrough from 8:30 to 9 kind of thing.
While they're already there.
While they're already there.
Right.
Just stuff.
We used to, the first probably 10 years I was here, parent orientation for ninth grade was pretty amazing. We'd get about 400 parents in there. Other districts would say, how do you do that? We get there, you know, and an hour out of that hour and a half or 2 hour presentation was on prevention. But what happened is the consumer didn't want to hear that anymore. It wasn't their kid. They want to hear about AP classes. They want to hear about sports. And so we took that out slowly and slowly, so now we don't do it anymore. And that's another thing of, you know, and I am who I am, but it's about adults, people. It's about us. It's not about kids, it's about adults. And we need to start acting like adults, being responsible, being willing to work with parents and educate what is best. And most of our parents are great, but if, let's say, 25% of our parents enable their kids and they don't know another way, how many times is Brian and Michelle on phones every day, 5-10 minutes saying, you know, I know you really, this is about you though, this isn't about your son or daughter. That's prevention, but it doesn't get documented anymore. We need to do more and more of that. We talked today about, you know, we blame kids, a lot of us do, and by the time they're 18, they will receive at least 100,000 messages to drink just through commercials. By the time they're 18, if they're lucky, the best case scenario, they get 100 messages that alcohol can cause you problems, and we wonder why kids are drinking in college. Us as adults have just programmed that too. That's an adult thing, and I know we can only control what we can control, but I think we talked about it before, and what your suggestion is good is we need to talk about it. And it's not about you, it's about us. It's an us thing. Schools can do better, parents can do better, our community can do better. Businesses for sure can do a much better job, okay? But it's about life and death. And since I've been here, I think we did the numbers, I think 24 kids have died, either in school or while they're in college. I think 20 out of the 24 is alcohol and drug related. So we're not talking about chewing gum. We're talking about devastating effects. So I think this is a good conversation, but I don't want to lose. Maybe we take it off parents and just say adults in general. And the other thing that we try to do, and if Betty's still here, we did it in our elementary schools, is confronting parents in a healthy way of when their little Johnny is out to 9:30 at night every night playing soccer, when they're 9 years old, and they're the best on their travel team, or their tag travel team, whatever they're doing, is whose self-esteem is that about? The kid with all A's, whose self-esteem is that all about? The kid playing 3 sports and they don't want to play 2 of them, whose self-esteem is that all about? It's not the kids, it's about parents. And what we see is a dramatic shift of, we talk about character integrity with adults, we talk about self-esteem towards our kids, we better look in the mirror. Because, you know, as healthy adults, our self-esteem should not be dictated on what our kids do. And I used this analogy not too long ago when I was growing up, and I tried to tell my parents, you know, I love baseball, my passion's baseball, but football, Friday night, girls, cheerleaders, stands full. My parents and my friends' parents would say, what are you thinking? Go with your passion, go with what you love. Today, our parents are the ones saying, you want to be on that field on Friday night. You want to be the star. You want to everyone wear your uniform. That's a shift. Now, that always happened when I was young, but not to the numbers it does today. And if we want to ignore that, that's fine. But we're going to still keep on having these problems. Because it's not a kid problem. It's an adult problem. We're making it pretty easy for them to make poor choices as adults.
I think we look at some of those next steps involving parents at an earlier age in the district, and I think we do have some opportunities to really look at a timeline. We have a number of events that take place, especially in the elementary setting and moving forward, that we could talk about getting parents more involved in some of these conversations when we have lots of parents at events. And
we have to institutionalize it like we talked about.
We can look at some of those next steps. In fact, that's what I would recommend is a next step, that we discuss a little more at our next central admin meeting, discuss with the board about putting forth a little group that could continue this conversation, because it's the tip of the iceberg and we're not going to be able to move through every single issue because there's so many angles. We could go the whole night about AP classes, we could go the whole night about drinking. So you're never going to be able to, you know, wrap that up in a 2-hour meeting, but some further conversation about some steps that we can take that we think are proactive, that don't involve, you know, I mean, a lot of planning, but things that we actually can do, a narrow focus. I think that would be a good next step moving forward. Does anybody have any other points to add?
One of the things that we often talk about is kind of collecting data and getting specific information. I know we in the past, the University of Michigan's done, we participated in this study, but now I know MyFi is coming down the pike. And I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about what MyFi is, and then and can talk, you know, the county level, kind of maybe how we can reach not only within Saline and some of the things we can do, but what are some of the partnerships we can leverage nearby. So we're going to tell about MyFi.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we've been collecting data since I've been here. We started with the Western Survey, switched to the Search Survey, then we went through U of M. So we have a lot of good data throughout the years about use, protective factors and all that. MyFi has always been around, but we never chose to use it because we were involved with the University of Michigan. So they do it the opposite years of another survey they do. So it's this year, and I think the Washtenaw County all agree they want to do it. And that will give us county-specific numbers, okay? And again, it is what it is. It's a tool. It's a piece of the pie that we want to look at, but it really looks at, you know, level of use. And what we want to, at least what I would encourage us to look at is, you know, the number of use in the last month or the last week, because, and that's another difference. There's a big difference between kids experimenting. That's a real overused term. You know, true experimentation is once or twice, 3 times you figure out what the drug does. We have a lot of kids that what we call living the lie, who are using it on a regular basis. It's like every other day, daily, or weekends. That's using, okay? So we can get a lot of that information from there. And it really will show if it dictates what we've been saying. It'll see a decrease in the prescription drug use. I think the county did a good job, and some of the education that we've done around prescription drug use has done a good job. And I think parents are the ones who really intervene on that and are more protective of the prescription drug stuff. So we're seeing a decline in prescription drug. So hopefully we'll see that modify. You can really match trends. You have access to monitoring the future survey by U of M, and that's been since 1972, I believe, and that's a huge, you can look at the trends and really match it up to what's going on, because you'll see when EAP programs and SAP programs started in the 80s, use really went down, and then when those were cut, they went up again. And when you look at Afghanistan and the prescription drugs, if you talk to any professional provider or substance abuse person 6 years ago, they'd tell you we're not going to have this problem. Afghanistan, prescription drug, equals heroin. I mean, this is not new. We saw it coming 5 years ago. And the biggest thing is the proponents of marijuana. So they said, look, marijuana, prescription drugs, Afghanistan, that's going to equal heroin in 5 years. Here we are. So, and those are what those surveys are.
How do they come up with those numbers for levels of use? Do you know how they come up with those numbers?
As far as the percentages and.
Yeah, I mean, how do they figure out what the level of use is?
This is all self-reported.
So it's just people coming and saying?
Anonymous, no, every kid will get a survey, it's anonymous.
Oh, okay.
There's a lot of things like, so they'll include drugs that don't exist.
Okay.
So if I say, yeah, I did that, that's thrown out, because those drugs don't even exist. Okay?
Okay.
And they try to, double questions to
See
kind of
if it's
validation, reliability.
right. Okay.
They're very
That's
good tools,
Yeah.
but again, it's self-report.
Yeah.
And, ultimately, from that standpoint, is looking at, Saline as being a part of the county, what can we then leverage, what are the trends? Saline is not unique in some ways, so what are the things that we can do? And then look at there are other resources out there, and one of the things we didn't necessarily talk a whole lot tonight about, what are those things that are around us that can be of support to our families, to our students, and to our staff? And I'll, I talked to Wendy, Saline Alive, these other groups that want to support our students and want to support our families, and I think we need to make sure we avail ourselves of those and partner with them.
I was actually contacted by a guy named David Cook, who travels the nation and talks to parents specifically about how to deal with a kid's self-esteem, drug use, that type of thing. He actually had a son who was a heroin addict as well, or is a heroin addict as well, and he was a public speaker before that, but now he's made this his life, journey. So I would be very happy. He's looking for a venue actually mid-May. It's close.
Okay.
But I'd be very happy to, if anybody wants to work with me on trying to get that venue and get people and parents in to hear this, then I'd be very happy to try to get that coordinated.
I think Todd made a good
Okay.
point about the fact that we had an event here in Saline, and don't take it the wrong way. I think there's an opportunity to leverage off of that to create an awareness and an engagement to the community. And so Cook, coupled with the discovery process on it, something where you say, here's what happened, let's talk what happened, let's talk about services we have available. Let's have and it is an event, and I'm not a big proponent on events per se, because those are one-time deals and they disappear, as opposed to an ongoing process and program. But we have an opportunity to take the event to introduce the processes and the tools. And,
People's attention right now.
Exactly. You got their attention now, take advantage of it.
A scared straight kind of.
Right.
It's not, it's more like, well, I look at the example is if you just gave a ninth grade parent a magnet refrigerator that has, here's the phone number for mental health, here's the phone number for depression, here's the phone number for anxiety disorder, here's the phone number for drugs, here's the phone number for alcohol, and just sits there next to the pizza number. That kind of stuff, so that it's there to them, so that, because one of the problems we ran into is, and you ran into it, when you wanted help, the obvious place to go was the police, and they're going to immediately turn into a criminal prosecution. So therefore you stop and say, I'm not going to make the phone call.
Well, I did do that,
But a lot of parents don't.
I agree. It really more is through, I think, the mental health community where I could have probably gotten more help as far as like, what do I do?
Right.
Because it took me about 2 years to figure out how to do it the right way in the first place. Then by that time, we were in battle all the time,
Exactly.
even though we still had great conversations, it was just, it took me a long time to learn how to be a parent of an addict.
And Todd, it took you
So-
15 years to search in the process to figure out how to get to
Figure
there?
out what the heck was going on.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Mhm.
And you were looking for answers.
Well, yeah, when I wasn't self-medicating.
Yeah. Yeah. The point is, a lot of the kids and their parents aren't looking for the answers.
No.
So we need to make it available to them so that it's there.
Yeah, I mean-
We give people the phone number for the call in
kid-
for sick day.
Yeah. I mean, the kid just is worried because he can't cope.
Right.
You know, and he has all these expectations of, you know, I've gotta take 6 AP classes this year and be the superstar on sports and, you know.
Well, Mark is right in your comment about, you know, I do agree with you that, because I've seen parents that do this, that, well, my kid's not doing that. Well,
Or,
I
"Oh,
don't,
it's
my
only
kid
alcohol
hanging out
and
with your
marijuana."
kid because, you know, my kids, and it's like, I know darn well their kid's doing that, you know? My kids have talked to me about the fact that your kids are doing it. So, I mean, you know, that does happen, and, you know, we gotta find a way, I think, to, that's part of the stigma, I think. You know, where they're just afraid to say, and then what they do is they just turn a blind eye, and God forbid, something doesn't happen to them like it does to me because they turn their head, you know, that would be even more tragic. So, you know, I really, my goal as a parent is to really try to get these parents to come out and start talking. I've had a lot of kids from the high school come talk to me and tell me things, and I wanna talk to you a little bit further too about that, and you too, Mark. And, I've had a lot of parents now start come talk to me, because I've said I'm not gonna talk to anybody about your name. You know, I might tell a little bit about your story, but, knowing that I'm not gonna say anything to anybody else, now they'll go ahead and talk about it. But I really do believe that lifting the stigma is a huge key to this.
And I think
So.
we've kind of beat around it, but I think we have to go forward saying this is a community
Yeah.
issue. This is not a school issue. We have to
we're
open
here
our
to help
arms
one
and say,
another.
we're here to help everybody,
Yes.
and it is a community thing.
Mhm.
And Mr. Shuby, I think you're spot on, is that it is a adult problem that we need to address there just to help our kids.
Mhm.
You know, because the kids, they just wanna survive.
Yeah.
You know, I mean.
They wanna be happy.
Their brains aren't formed well enough yet to
Right.
be able to, you know, make adults decisions,
Mhm.
you know, and something comes along that makes it so that, hey, tomorrow's not so bad. Oh, I'm gonna do that again, yeah, you know, and they're stuck. They've
Yeah.
made a decision without really realizing the impact of it.
And we can use those resources, because I think you mentioned, you know, if you stick me in front of a group, I'll put them to sleep pretty quick. But if we put this guy in front of a group,
Right.
you know, and I know I'm a better parent because of the job I have. Because I hang out with kids all day, and I pick things up and I learn. And the kids we have, the resources are amazing, so, and we can institutionalize that, and kind of what Steve said. And I think that's the big thing of, because it is a very complex issue, but then it really isn't. We know kids thrive when our adults are being adults. We know that parents, when they have clear expectations about alcohol and drug use, and kids know there's gonna be consequences, they start at a much later age in their life and they use at a lower rate. There's books proving that. There's no contradictory research to that. So it's not as complicated as we think. We gotta control what we can control. And the same thing as parenting. We have firm boundaries at a school, you know. It's about health. It's not about good kids or bad. They're all awesome kids. You know, it's about health versus unhealthy behaviors. We institutionalize it, find those places, 10 minutes there, 20 minutes there, where parents are getting messages a couple times a year, you know, at functions, whether it's parent orientation. You talked about kindergarten roundup, and that's the other thing. When our teachers at elementary school, you know, put their arm around a kid and say, "How you feeling? Tell me how you feeling." That's prevention. Now, you're not going to think of it as prevention, but it is. When our counselors, you know, do a conflict management session, that's prevention. It is. And so we do a lot of that. We need to start sharing maybe more with parents of what we do and educating them what they do, and knowing too that as a parent, I can do everything you tell me to do in terms of prevention. My kid can still make mistakes. But what I see is parents that are educated, they catch it quicker, and the road to recovery, if you will, is a lot easier because they catch it easier, sooner.
It's also important that our teachers and our coaches understand how to manage that parent communication, because, my kids are through the system now, but it was very clear from 6th grade on, teachers and administrators said, I don't want to talk to you, I want to talk to your child. When your child was in a sport, I don't want to talk to you, I'll talk to your child. And so the result, they say, fine, then I won't talk to you. And you don't want the parent to tell you who should play in left tackle, who should play in quarterback. That's not the conversation to happen. But when your child comes home upset from something that happened at practice, by something the coach said that humiliated them in front of their peers, that's a conversation the coach should have. And that's a conversation the parent should feel comfortable having. The same thing happened in the classroom, where a teacher may make a comment out of context and the kid took it as a personal insult and left out of the room crying. Well, when the kid comes home and tells the parent about it, the parent should feel comfortable to call the teacher, call the administrator, just have a conversation. And we don't have that as a protocol among parents or among administrators or among teachers to say how to handle that intermediate conversation. And there's an awareness that needs to happen for parents and awareness happening to administrators and coaches about what is the acceptable level of communication. That don't talk to me, I don't want to deal with you, which was the behavior of many of our coaches for 10 years I was in the district with athletics. It's not healthy, because the reality is that's where the kids are most engaged with their peers, and there's an awful lot that happens on that field.
Curious if you guys had talked about kind of an action item.
Right, in that we would discuss at our next central admin meeting, and then Karen and myself and the board can talk about putting together a small team that can further this discussion, in particular about some of the discussion about the parents and institutionalizing some of our beliefs about how to educate parents. Not to say anybody's doing anything wrong. I think that was a good point. It's not about flawed parenting. It's about, let's get the information out there early, where we have a lot of parents involved, a large percentage of parents, and really work towards doing something in that area, and then talk about our programs that are going on and continue with that. But I do think we've got to get more of a narrow focus on what we can do versus trying to be, well, we've got 15 issues and we're going to try to go after, well, let's talk about a component that we're all agreeing is an issue. We need to help all of us as adults know more of what the steps are, what are some of the warning signs, what are the things that we need to be doing for kids at an early age, and that's something that I think we can control. So, that's an area we can go after. So I would recommend that we look to put together a small group, and although it is nice to have a big audience to talk about this, it's sometimes a smaller group will be able to get more done. And so I think we talk about who would be involved, so we're representing a lot of people, and we'll have to have some further conversation about getting that going.
Yeah, and I would think Trustee Delhay would be part of that, and I would ask Trustee Freeze to be part of that process as well.
Okay. Sounds good.
I'd see it as a discussion item on the 15th. Circle back in the next board meeting and talk more about kind of where we've been.
Okay.
You talked about a central admin meeting. How often do those take place?
Every Monday.
Oh, okay, all right. So it's not
We would talk
quarterly
about it
thing.
again.
Okay.
8 a.m. 8 a.m. on Monday morning.
Fire drill. Yeah. Good.
Are we moving on now?
Can we say?
I do have one more thing, a topic that we haven't touched on. It's my feelings about winter this year.
Oh boy.
It's killing me. I don't know about anybody else.
I have a feeling this is going to be a lengthy conversation.
A lot of my
It's
depression is definitely seasonal related, so.
We're all in that boat.
Week and a half to spring break.
Week and a half, all right.
Well, again,
I know.
Again, I'd like to thank our speakers this evening. Certainly, we appreciate that. Assistant Superintendent Lodge, Trustee Delhay for your involvement in this, and I'm sure your continued involvement. I think it's a good session, and I think the key thing is that we keep that ball moving forward, and with the goal of how can we help our young people so that they're where we all want them to be. So just to wrap up a little business here, the chair will entertain a motion to authorize items A through F as part of the consent agenda. Trustee Freeze, and a second by trustee Zimmer. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Items on the next agenda.
We have, this will be a discussion item from an action item, school of choice.
Yep.
Will be on the agenda. Pay to participate.
Yep.
Will be on the agenda.
Budget report?
Yep. Probably something from policy. And then just follow up.
Yeah, follow up on the social emotional wellness.
Yep. Very good. All right. The next Board of Education meeting will be held on April 15th, 2014, tax day, at 6:30 here at Liberty. And with that, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Trustee Carter, support. Secretary Heineck. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're done.